The afternoon sun glared off the polished glass storefronts of Westbridge Plaza, the kind of upscale shopping district where luxury cars glided in and out like silent, well-behaved animals, and the sidewalks always smelled faintly of expensive perfume. It was the kind of place where people walked with purpose, dressed in brands that whispered wealth, and where security guards stood tall not just to protect the stores, but to protect the illusion that nothing unpleasant ever happened there. But illusions break easily, especially when racism is hiding behind a badge and a uniform. On this particular day, the illusion shattered the moment Officer Briggs and Officer Rayner stepped out of their cruiser, their eyes immediately falling on a black woman standing near the entrance of a boutique, scrolling casually through her phone. Her name was Liana Carter, though the officers didn't care to know that. They saw her skin color before they saw anything else, and in their minds, that was all the suspicion they needed. Liana was dressed elegantly in a navy blue pencil dress, her posture confident but relaxed, the kind of aura someone only carries after years of knowing exactly who they are and refusing to shrink for anyone. She had just parked her Lexus SUV in a perfectly legal parking spot, but as she leaned against it while responding to a text, the two officers approached her like she was a threat lurking in a crime report. Their footsteps echoed with a kind of authority that didn't ask questions. It demanded compliance. "Ma'am," Officer Briggs barked, the word sharp like metal scraping concrete. Liana looked up with calm, steady eyes, offering a polite smile, unaware that this simple interaction was about to turn into a viral storm. "Yes, officer? Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice warm but curious. The officers exchanged a glance, a silent agreement between two men who believed they were about to make some big catch. "We received reports of a suspected vehicle theft in this lot," Rayner announced, his hand hovering near his holster, as if the petite woman in front of him might suddenly transform into a criminal mastermind. Liana blinked in confusion. "A vehicle theft? I've only been here 5 minutes," she replied, not defensive, simply stating facts. But facts didn't matter to men looking for guilt in the wrong places. Briggs stepped closer, too close, his tone turning more aggressive. "We need to see ID, and step away from the vehicle." The command snapped in the air, startling a few passers-by who slowed their steps but didn't intervene. Luxury districts love drama until they were asked to be part of it. Liana straightened, her expression tightening just slightly, not out of fear, but out of irritation that she knew all too well. She had lived through moments like this before, moments where people saw only her race first and her humanity second. "Officer, I don't mind showing ID," she said calmly. "But can you tell me why you're assuming this is not my vehicle?" Rayner scoffed, his impatience boiling. "Ma'am, don't get difficult. Step away from the car." The word difficult hit her ears like an old, tired insult used on countless black women before her, weaponized to silence them and shrink them. When she didn't move instantly, Briggs reached out and gripped her wrist, not violently enough to cause injury, but rough enough to show domination. A few people gasped. Someone began recording on their phone. Liana stared at his hand, then at him, an icy calm settling over her. "Let go," she said quietly, but the firmness in her tone carried the kind of authority even they didn't recognize yet. Instead of listening, the officers doubled down, escalating what had never needed escalation. "Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle," Briggs insisted. "We're detaining you until we verify your story." Your story, as if her existence required their validation. As if a black woman owning a luxury car was a story too unbelievable to be true. And yet, through all of it, Liana didn't panic. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't tremble. Because she knew something the officers didn't. Something that was going to flip this entire scene upside down in a matter of minutes. She allowed them to make their scene, allowed them to dig their hole, because she knew what was coming. She knew that the moment her name was run through their system, the moment someone made a call, the truth would hit them like a tidal wave. And while they continued their unnecessary display of authority, a crowd began forming. Whispers filled the air. Phones pointed toward the confrontation. The officers didn't care. They thought they were doing their job. They thought they were catching a suspect. They thought they were in control. But they were wrong. Very, very wrong. Because Liana Carter wasn't just any black woman standing beside a luxury car. She was the wife of Police Chief Marcus Carter, the highest-ranking law enforcement official in the entire city. And the storm that was about to hit Briggs and Rayner would be one they would never forget. As the officers continued their misguided performance, the tension in the air thickened like humidity before a thunderstorm. People who had been window shopping moments earlier were now frozen in place, drawn to the scene like witnesses to an unfolding disaster they couldn't stop but couldn't look away from either. A teenager near the fountain whispered to his friend, "Man, they're going to be in trouble," while an older woman shook her head in disappointment, muttering, "This is shameful." But the officers didn't care about onlookers or whispers. Their attention was fixed entirely on Liana, as if she were prey caught in the wrong neighborhood. Officer Briggs maintained a tight grip on her wrist, while Rayner circled the vehicle, writing down the license plate number, as though he had discovered some priceless clue. "Dispatch, we need a check on a black female, mid-30s, possible involvement in an attempted auto theft," Rayner announced into his radio, making sure his voice carried far enough for everyone around to hear. The wording wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate attempt to paint her as a criminal before any facts were established. Liana inhaled deeply, the kind of breath that held both frustration and restraint. She could have ended this with a single sentence, "I'm the police chief's wife." But she refused to use her husband's position like a shield or an escape hatch. If she were going to be treated fairly, it should be because she was a citizen with rights, not because she was married to authority. Let them run the name, she thought. Let them find out on their own. Meanwhile, Rayner pretended to inspect the car for signs of forced entry, leaning close to the window, tapping the door handle as if expecting it to fall off. A man from the crowd finally spoke up, his voice edged with irritation. "Officers, she didn't do anything. She was just standing there when you showed up." But Briggs shut him down instantly. "Sir, step back unless you want to be detained as well." The threat worked. The man backed away, hands raised. Liana watched silently, her mouth pressing into a thin line. She knew this script too well. Officers escalating an innocent situation, hoping authority alone would silence any truth that contradicted their assumptions. When Briggs tugged her wrist again, she exhaled slowly. "Officer," she said evenly, "you are detaining me without cause." Her tone was calm, too calm for Briggs' pride to handle. He interpreted her composure as defiance. "Keep your voice down and cooperate," he snapped, though her voice hadn't risen at all. Dispatch crackled over the radio. "Copy that. Stand by for verification." Rayner looked victorious, as if the mere process of checking her name justified the entire ordeal. He stood with his hands on his belt, chest puffed out, relishing his imagined authority. Briggs finally released her wrist, but pointed at her aggressively. "Do not move from this spot." Liana rubbed her wrist gently, more annoyed than hurt. She glanced at the growing crowd, faces filled with disbelief, disgust, or quiet anger. Some recorded openly, while others pretended to check their phones, cameras angled toward the incident. The officers noticed, but didn't care. They believed that once dispatch confirmed their suspicion, the footage would make them look like heroes. Racism had a way of blinding people to their own future consequences. But the consequences were already on their way. 2 blocks away, Chief Marcus Carter stepped out of his office at headquarters, holding a coffee cup and planning nothing more than a routine afternoon briefing. He was a composed man, tall, serious, respected by his department not out of fear, but because he demanded integrity and accountability. His officers knew his expectations, policing without bias, without ego, and without the abuse of power. But Chief Carter's phone buzzed with a message from his assistant chief. "Sir, a situation is developing at Westbridge Plaza. You should see this." Attached was a short 10-second video clip already circulating within internal channels. The clip showed Briggs gripping Liana's wrist. It showed the commanding stance. It showed her calm expression. It showed everything. Marcus froze. The coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor as he grabbed his keys. He didn't call first. He didn't ask questions. He knew his wife, knew her strength, her dignity, and the unfair battles she had faced in the world because of her skin color. And he knew those two officers were about to face the biggest mistake of their careers. Back at the plaza, dispatch finally replied. "Officers, we're running the name now. Stand by." But before the sentence could finish, a black unmarked SUV pulled sharply into the lot. The doors flew open. Chief Carter stepped out with a fury in his eyes that made even the growing crowd fall silent. He moved with a kind of authority that didn't need to shout. It radiated off him like heat. Briggs and Rayner glanced over, annoyed at the interruption, until they recognized the man walking toward them. Their faces drained instantly, and Liana, standing exactly where they had ordered her to remain, simply folded her arms and waited. The storm had arrived. The plaza felt different now, charged, unsettled, yet strangely empowered. The crowd that had gathered wasn't just watching anymore. They were witnessing something rare, accountability unfolding in real time. But for Liana, the moment didn't feel triumphant. It felt heavy. Heavy with the weight of every black woman who had been disrespected, dismissed, or endangered because someone in uniform let bias cloud their judgment. Heavy with the knowledge that if she had been someone without connections or status, this might have ended very differently. As Briggs and Rayner handed over their badges with trembling hands, Liana found herself studying their faces, not to feel pity, but to understand. She wanted to see if they realized what they had actually done, or if they were only scared because they had messed with the wrong person. Briggs' jaw was clenched, eyes darting around like a trapped animal. Rayner looked stunned, almost dazed, as if the consequences didn't feel real yet. Marcus noticed too. "You're not being punished because she's my wife," he said, addressing them and the crowd at the same time. "You're being punished because what you did was unacceptable. Because this could have happened to anyone, and probably has." The crowd murmured, agreeing. A woman near the front raised her phone again, recording Marcus's words. A teenage boy muttered, finally someone saying it. And yet, while the moment resonated with a sense of overdue truth, the tension was far from resolved. Marcus turned toward his vehicle, pulling out his phone. He needed to notify Internal Affairs immediately and initiate the formal suspension protocol. But before he made the call, he looked back at Liana. "Come with me," he said gently. "Let's get you out of here." She didn't move at first. Instead, she glanced at the people still watching. People who looked at her with a mix of admiration, sympathy, and a sobering realization that not even the police chief's wife was safe from racial profiling. Liana stepped closer to Marcus, but didn't leave yet. "I'm okay," she told him, though her voice carried the strain of someone who had been holding herself together for far too long. "I just need a moment." Marcus nodded, respecting her space. "Take your time," he said quietly, placing a steadying hand on her back. Liana walked toward the crowd, not to address them formally, but because she felt an invisible pull, a responsibility to say something. She didn't plan it, didn't rehearse it, didn't even fully understand it until she opened her mouth. "I want to thank those of you who stepped in," she said, her voice steady, carrying farther than she expected. "I know it's not easy to speak up when police are involved. Some of you filmed. Some of you questioned what you saw. Some of you just didn't look away. That matters." A few people nodded. Others murmured in agreement. Liana continued, "But I need everyone here to understand something. This isn't about me. I'll be fine because of who I'm connected to. But too many people aren't. Too many don't get a chief showing up. Too many don't get witnesses who speak out. And too many don't get justice." Her words hit the crowd with force, not loud, not dramatic, but powerful in their raw honesty. Marcus watched her, admiration and worry mixing in his eyes. He knew she was strong, but he also knew strength came at a price. Briggs and Rayner watched too, each shifting uncomfortably as if her words were aimed at them, which, in a sense, they were. "I'm not saying all officers are like this," Liana continued. "I know better than anyone that there are good ones. But safety shouldn't depend on whether you're related to one. It should be a right." For a moment, there was silence, heavy, thoughtful. Then someone clapped. Then another. And then the sound spread, not a loud, roaring applause, but a deliberate, respectful acknowledgement of truth. Liana took a slow breath, the tension in her chest easing just slightly. Marcus approached her again, ready to take her home, ready to protect her from the emotional storm still swirling in the air. "Are you ready to go?" he asked gently. She nodded. Yes. But just as they turned to leave, the plaza erupted again, this time in whispers and murmurs. 2 more squad cars had pulled up. Internal affairs officers stepped out, their expression serious, clipped, and all business. They approached Marcus. "Chief Carter," one of them said, offering a curt nod. "We received your message. We're here to take official statements and collect the footage." Marcus nodded. "Good. Start with the witnesses. Then take the officers back to headquarters." Briggs and Rayner exchanged horrified glances, realizing their suspension was becoming something much bigger. Formal investigations, internal reviews, public reports. Their careers weren't just in danger, they were hanging by frayed threads. As internal affairs officers began gathering witnesses, Marcus placed a protective arm around Liana, guiding her toward the exit of the plaza. But before they reached the SUV, a reporter who had rushed over grabbed her mic, calling out, "Mrs. Carter, can you comment on what happened today?" Marcus shot the reporter a warning glare, but Liana held up a hand. "It's fine," she said softly. She turned to the reporter, her expression calm but fierce. "Yes, here's my comment." She paused, letting the weight of her words build. "Racism doesn't care about your status. It doesn't care who you're married to. It happens everywhere, even in places like this, even with people who are supposed to protect you. And today," she glanced back at the officers who were now being escorted toward the IA vehicle. "Today, it happened to the wrong woman." The reporter lowered her mic slowly, stunned. Liana stepped into the SUV with her husband, closing the door quietly behind her. The engine started. The crowd parted. And as the vehicle pulled away, the plaza behind them buzzed with the beginning of a story that would soon explode far beyond the city limits. The drive home was quiet at first, too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't just sit between 2 people but presses in on the walls, the windows, even the air itself. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles whitening as he replayed the scene over and over in his mind. He had dealt with countless incidents of misconduct during his years as chief, but seeing his own wife treated the way so many others had been treated under the shadow of racial bias, it wasn't just professional for him. It was personal in a way that shook him to his core. Next to him, Liana sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on nothing in particular as the city passed by outside her window. But her silence wasn't empty. It was full of anger, exhaustion, reflection, and something else Marcus knew all too well: resolve. Eventually, he broke the silence. "Liana, I'm sorry." His voice was low, breathy, almost unsure, so unlike the commanding authority he had displayed at the plaza. She didn't look at him yet. "You didn't do anything wrong," she replied softly. "You don't need to apologize for their choices." Marcus swallowed hard. "I know. But I should have been able to prevent something like this. If officers under my command are acting like this, then Marcus," she interrupted gently. "You're blaming yourself for a disease you didn't create." That made him glance at her. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharper than ever. Bias, prejudice, profiling, they were here long before you got your badge. You didn't build this system. You've been trying to fix it. He gripped the wheel harder. "Not fast enough." Liana exhaled slowly. "Maybe not. But today proved that consequences matter. You held them accountable. You didn't look away." Marcus shook his head slightly. "Because you were the one they targeted. If it had been a stranger," she turned to him now, meeting his eyes completely, "then you still would have done the right thing. I know you." He softened just a little, but the burden still weighed on him. "I just hate that you had to be the example," he whispered. "That you had to be the person they decided to harass." Liana looked back out the window, scenes of passing trees and storefronts blurring by. "Marcus, it was always going to be someone. Today, it happened to be me. Tomorrow, it could be someone else. But this time people saw how quickly things can go wrong when officers stop seeing people as human." The car turned onto their street, lined with tall oak trees that cast long shadows across the pavement. Their home was beautiful, an elegant two-story house with white brick tall windows, and a front yard Liana had filled with rose bushes and jasmine vines. It was the kind of home that radiated peace. But today, even home felt heavier. Marcus parked the SUV and turned off the engine. Neither of them moved right away. "Before we go inside," he said, "I need to know, are you okay? Really okay?" She leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes briefly. "I'm tired," she admitted. Tired of the same story, the same mistakes, the same assumptions. Marcus nodded. Tired. That was a word he understood too well. "But I'm also determined," she added suddenly, opening her eyes again. "I don't want this to be just another headline that disappears in a week. I want something to come out of this." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" Liana hesitated for a moment. "I don't know yet. But something that forces people to pay attention. Something that helps the people who don't get cameras pointed at them when things go wrong." They finally stepped out of the SUV and walked the path toward the front door. Before Marcus could reach for the handle, Liana gently placed her hand on his arm, stopping him. "You realize," she said softly, "that this story is going to explode everywhere, right?" Marcus sighed. "It already has. The department's public relations team has called me 6 times in the last 20 minutes. Liana offered a faint, tired smile. "Of course they have." They stepped inside, greeted by the familiar scent of vanilla candles and polished wood floors. Their home was immaculate, warm, full of framed photos, wedding pictures, family gatherings, holidays. It was a place built with love. But today, its warmth clashed with the cold reality of what had happened. Liana set her purse down and moved toward the living room, sinking slowly onto the sofa. Marcus set his keys on the counter and joined her. "I'm going to have to give a statement soon," he told her. "The press will want a full response by tonight. The mayor already called." Liana looked at him, not with worry, but with clarity. "Then say the truth," she said. "All of it. Don't soften it. Don't protect them." Marcus nodded. "I won't." She took his hand. "And Marcus." "Yes. Don't protect me either. I don't want this to be about the chief's wife. I want it to be about what happened." Marcus held her gaze, absorbing the weight of her words. "Then we'll make it about that," he promised. "About the truth." Liana leaned against him, finally allowing herself a moment to rest her head on his shoulder. For the first time since the confrontation, she let her guard down just a little. Outside, the world was beginning to buzz with headlines, opinions, and outrage. Inside, the storm settled into something quieter, but far from over. Because the real battle, the one for change, was only just beginning. The drive home was quiet at first, too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't just sit between two people but presses in on the walls, the windows, even the air itself. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles whitening as he replayed the scene over and over in his mind. He had dealt with countless incidents of misconduct during his years as chief, but seeing his own wife treated the way so many others had been treated under the shadow of racial bias, it wasn't just professional for him. It was personal in a way that shook him to his core. Next to him, Liana sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on nothing in particular as the city passed by outside her window. But her silence wasn't empty. It was full of anger, exhaustion, reflection, and something else Marcus knew all too well: resolve. Eventually, he broke the silence. "Liana, I'm sorry." His voice was low, breathy, almost unsure, so unlike the commanding authority he had displayed at the plaza. She didn't look at him yet. "You didn't do anything wrong," she replied softly. "You don't need to apologize for their choices." Marcus swallowed hard. "I know. But I should have been able to prevent something like this. If officers under my command are acting like this, then Marcus," she interrupted gently. "You're blaming yourself for a disease you didn't create." That made him glance at her. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharper than ever. "Bias, prejudice, profiling, they were here long before you got your badge. You didn't build this system. You've been trying to fix it. He gripped the wheel harder. Not fast enough. Liana exhaled slowly. Maybe not. But today proved that consequences matter. You held them accountable. You didn't look away. Marcus shook his head slightly. Because you were the one they targeted. If it had been a stranger, she turned to him now, meeting his eyes completely, then you still would have done the right thing. I know you. He softened, just a little. But the burden still weighed on him. I just hate that you had to be the example, he whispered. That you had to be the person they decided to harass. Liana looked back out the window, scenes of passing trees and storefronts blurring by. Marcus, it was always going to be someone. Today, it happened to be me. Tomorrow, it could be someone else. But this time people saw how quickly things can go wrong when officers stop seeing people as human. The car turned onto their street, lined with tall oak trees that cast long shadows across the pavement. Their home was beautiful, an elegant two-story house with white brick tall windows, and a front yard Liana had filled with rose bushes and jasmine vines. It was the kind of home that radiated peace. But today, even home felt heavier. Marcus parked the SUV and turned off the engine. Neither of them moved right away. Before we go inside, he said, I need to know, are you okay? Really okay? She leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes briefly. I'm tired, she admitted. Tired of the same story, the same mistakes, the same assumptions. Marcus nodded. Tired. That was a word he understood too well. But I'm also determined, she added suddenly, opening her eyes again. I don't want this to be just another headline that disappears in a week. I want something to come out of this. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Like what? Liana hesitated for a moment. I don't know yet. But something that forces people to pay attention. Something that helps the people who don't get cameras pointed at them when things go wrong. They finally stepped out of the SUV and walked the path toward the front door. Before Marcus could reach for the handle, Liana gently placed her hand on his arm, stopping him. You realize, she said softly, that this story is going to explode everywhere, right? Marcus sighed. It already has. The department's public relations team has called me 6 times in the last 20 minutes. Liana offered a faint, tired smile. Of course they have. They stepped inside, greeted by the familiar scent of vanilla candles and polished wood floors. Their home was immaculate, warm, full of framed photos, wedding pictures, family gatherings, holidays. It was a place built with love. But today, its warmth clashed with the cold reality of what had happened. Liana set her purse down and moved toward the living room, sinking slowly onto the sofa. Marcus set his keys on the counter and joined her. I'm going to have to give a statement soon, he told her. The press will want a full response by tonight. The mayor already called. Liana looked at him, not with worry, but with clarity. Then say the truth, she said. All of it. Don't soften it. Don't protect them. Marcus nodded. I won't. She took his hand. And Marcus. Yes. Don't protect me either. I don't want this to be about the chief's wife. I want it to be about what happened. Marcus held her gaze, absorbing the weight of her words. Then we'll make it about that, he promised. About the truth. Liana leaned against him, finally allowing herself a moment to rest her head on his shoulder. For the first time since the confrontation, she let her guard down just a little. Outside, the world was beginning to buzz with headlines, opinions, and outrage. Inside, the storm settled into something quieter, but far from over. Because the real battle, the one for change, was only just beginning. News traveled faster than either of them expected. While Marcus and Liana tried to settle into the quiet of their home, the world outside erupted. Within an hour, the video from Westbridge Plaza, captured from multiple angles, had begun circulating across social media platforms. Clips of Officer Briggs gripping Liana's wrist, of Marcus arriving, of badges being confiscated, all of it was being dissected, shared, captioned, argued over, and amplified. Hashtags began trending. Comment sections flooded with outrage, support, analysis, and anger. Some viewers praised Liana's calm strength, others condemned the officers, while a few attempted to twist the narrative, insisting the officers were just doing their jobs. But the majority saw the truth clearly. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was profiling, plain and simple. And the fact that the victim happened to be the police chief's wife only magnified the conversation. By the time Marcus stepped into his study to prepare his official statement, network news outlets were already calling the incident the Westbridge Plaza confrontation. Marcus sat at his desk, running a hand over his face. His desk lamp cast a warm glow across a room filled with awards, certificates, and years of law enforcement history. Photographs of him with community leaders, medals from service, commendations for leadership. Tonight, none of it mattered. Tonight, he was not thinking like a decorated police chief. He was thinking like a man who had watched his wife be disrespected and endangered by the very institution he had sworn to uphold with integrity. Liana entered the study quietly, bringing him a glass of water. "You've been staring at the same sentence for 10 minutes, she said gently. Marcus glanced up, managing a tired smile. I want to say this right." She placed the glass on the desk. "Then stop thinking like the chief for a moment. Think like Marcus." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Marcus wants to burn the whole system down," he admitted. "Chief Carter has to be diplomatic." Liana gave a faint, knowing smirk. "Then find the space between the two." He nodded, taking her advice to heart. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door she added, "Be honest. Not careful. Honest." Marcus took a deep breath and began writing again. Meanwhile, Liana wandered back into the living room, where her phone lit up with dozens of messages, friends checking on her, community members offering support, reporters demanding interviews. She ignored all of them for now, choosing instead to sit in silence. Her reflection in the large window stared back at her, composed but tired, elegant but drained. She wondered how many other women had stared at themselves like this after a similar encounter. How many had cried? How many had been ignored? How many had never received justice? She refused to let this moment be wasted. She got up and walked to the bookshelf, pulling down a journal she hadn't written in for months. Flipping it open, she began writing her thoughts, raw, unfiltered, emotional. She poured out every detail of the confrontation, not because she was trying to document it for evidence, but because she needed to process it. Her handwriting danced sharply across the page as she wrote about Briggs's grip on her wrist, Rayner's dismissive tone, the crowd shock, her decision to remain calm. She wrote about Marcus's arrival, how his presence had steadied her and enraged her at the same time. Not because she was upset with him, but because she hated how necessary his intervention had been. When she finally set the pen down, several pages were filled. Her chest felt lighter, but her resolve felt stronger. She knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. A knock on the front door interrupted her thoughts. Marcus emerged from the study, confused. "Expecting anyone?" he asked. Liana shook her head. They exchanged a glance, half cautious, half resigned. Marcus opened the door, and standing on the porch were 3 members of the Civilian Oversight Committee. Their expressions were serious but respectful. "Chief Carter," the woman in front said, "we saw the footage. We'd like to speak with both of you." Marcus allowed them inside, and the committee members settled into the living room. Liana sat upright, her hands folded, her posture calm but alert. The lead member began speaking. "First, we want to say we're glad you're okay. But more importantly, we want you to know that this incident requires a formal review that goes beyond internal affairs. The public trust has been shaken." Marcus nodded. "I'm aware, and I welcome the review." The woman continued, "This case is symbolic, not because of who you are, Mrs. Carter, but because of what it represents. People are demanding broader action, training reform, bias evaluations, policy changes, transparency." Liana listened carefully, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Symbolic," she repeated. "I don't want symbolism." The committee members exchanged glances. She continued, her voice steady. "I want something real. Something that protects people who don't have a chief showing up for them. Something that changes how officers approach moments like the one I lived through. Marcus watched her with pride swelling inside him. This was the woman he knew, powerful, unafraid, unwilling to let injustice sink quietly into the background. The committee member nodded slowly. Then we need your voice. Both of yours. This could become the catalyst for a citywide reform initiative. Liana took a deep breath. Then let's do it. Marcus agreed. We're in. The committee members stood, thanking them before leaving. As the door closed, Marcus turned to Liana. Looks like you found your something. She met his eyes with absolute certainty. No, she said softly. It found me. The fallout from that night didn't fade quietly. It grew like a storm gathering force. And by the seventh day, the entire city felt the weight of it. While Tara stayed mostly indoors, recovering from the emotional chaos, the police department found itself under a spotlight hotter than any interrogation lamp. Media vans lined the street outside headquarters. Protesters held signs demanding accountability. And social media raged with a chorus of voices that refused to let the issue die down. Inside all that noise, Tara found herself battling something more personal. An invisible heaviness pressing against her chest every morning. A reminder that even when you know you did nothing wrong, trauma doesn't care about logic. She replayed that night involuntarily. The rough tone, the accusing eyes, the disbelief in her voice as she said, I live here. And the officer's dismissive response, as if her words and her existence were inconveniences he didn't have time for. She hated that her hand still shook when she heard a police siren, even though her husband was the chief. She hated that one encounter had rewritten the sense of safety she'd spent years building. Marcus felt it too, his own version of the same storm. Every day he walked into headquarters. Whispers trailed behind him. Some of the officers supported him, saying he did the right thing by disciplining McConnell and Reyes. Others muttered that he let his personal life interfere with department matters. Some masked their resentment in professional language. Others didn't bother. But Marcus didn't care about their grumbling. What kept him awake at night was Tara's silence. She wasn't angry. Anger had a sound. Her silence didn't. And that scared him more than the political mess he was navigating. On the seventh morning after the incident, he found her sitting at the dining table with her laptop open but untouched. She had been staring at the same blank document for nearly an hour. She was supposed to be working on a report for her advocacy group, but every time she tried to focus, her mind drifted back to those flashing red lights and the cold command, step out of the vehicle. Marcus sat beside her quietly, not wanting to intrude, but also refusing to walk away. Tara finally exhaled and closed the laptop, leaning back as if trying to escape something hovering over her. I don't want this to define me, she whispered. But it's trying to. Marcus swallowed hard. I know. And I'm doing everything I can. I know you are, she interrupted gently. This isn't about you. This is about the part of me that thought I was past this. That thought I was safe. And there it was, the sentence that broke him a little. Because he had dedicated his entire life to creating a system where people felt safe, especially black residents who carried the long shadow of generations of mistrust. And yet his own wife had been made to feel powerless in front of officers wearing his badge. Meanwhile, the investigation committee, activated the moment Tara filed the formal report, moved slowly but intensely. Interviews, body cam reviews, public pressure statements. The process was exhaustive. And every step of it reminded Tara that she had to relive the experience again and again for strangers analyzing her trauma as if it were evidence on a table. Still, she didn't back down. Every time she entered a hearing room, she walked tall, even if her nerves trembled beneath the surface. She spoke clearly, firmly, describing each detail without exaggeration and without minimizing. She refused to be the woman who let the system silence her. Many community members saw her courage and rallied behind her. Activists sent her messages of support. Her advocacy group asked if she wanted to step back from upcoming events, but Tara shook her head. If I step back now, she said, I'm letting them win twice. But with support also came hostility. Anonymous emails, troll comments, accusations that she was ruining officers' careers for a misunderstanding. Some said she was using her husband's position to gain attention. Others claimed she had exaggerated everything. Tara read most of it in silence, then closed her phone and breathed deeply, reminding herself that hate only grows when fed. She refused to feed it. Despite the chaos, something unexpected bloomed within the city. Conversations. Hard ones. Necessary ones. People began sharing their own stories, some quiet, some loud, some buried for years. Tara had unintentionally cracked open a door others had been too afraid to touch. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. It had become a mirror reflecting a deeper wound in the system. But inside her home, the tender wound still ached. She and Marcus tried to maintain normal moments, cooking dinner together, watching late-night TV, taking slow walks around the neighborhood. But the unspoken weight lingered. Some nights, she woke up gasping, not from nightmares, but from the memory of feeling small in a world that insisted she shouldn't be. Marcus would hold her, whispering reassurance, though he knew words couldn't erase the imprint of fear. By the end of that 7th day, though, something shifted. Tara stood by the living room window, looking out at the street where it had all happened. And instead of fear, she felt something else, rising. Resolve. She wasn't done healing, not even close. But she knew now she wasn't broken. She wasn't defeated. She wasn't going to shrink into silence. She was going to rise, even if she rose slowly. And that realization, fragile but powerful, became the beginning of her next chapter, one she was determined to write on her own terms. The days that followed were a whirlwind of formalities, scrutiny, and the unrelenting glare of public attention. Tara and Marcus had to navigate multiple layers of complexity. Internal affairs investigations, media inquiries, city council hearings, and an endless stream of social media commentary. Each interaction carried the weight of 1,000 invisible eyes, people dissecting every word and movement, looking for inconsistencies or signs of weakness. Tara's mornings began with meticulous preparation. She would rehearse her testimony in front of the mirror, correcting her posture, her tone, even the cadence of her voice. She refused to show anger, though it simmered just beneath her calm exterior. She refused to let her narrative be diluted by emotion or misinterpreted as hysteria. If the world was going to listen, she had to speak clearly, concisely, and with the undeniable authority that only truth can command. Marcus watched her closely, quietly admiring the way she carried herself, yet also fearing for her, knowing firsthand how exhausting it was to maintain such composure under relentless pressure. The investigation meetings were grueling. Officers, witnesses, and analysts pored over every detail from the plaza confrontation. Body cam footage was scrutinized frame by frame. Witness statements were compared, contradictions noted, and timelines meticulously reconstructed. Tara sat through hours of questioning, her patience tested continuously. She answered every inquiry without hesitation, never flinching when confronted with challenging questions. Even when the investigators subtly suggested that she could have handled things differently, she remained steadfast. Each time, she reminded herself that the purpose was not to vent frustration, but to establish accountability and create a precedent. Her calm precision often contrasted sharply with the visible discomfort of officers like Briggs and Rayner, who avoided eye contact and fidgeted with pens and clipboards, silently acknowledging their wrongdoing even when words failed them. Outside the hearings, the city's discourse had reached fever pitch. Community forums were organized, some in support of Tara, others attempting to defend the officers' actions. Local newspapers ran editorials analyzing racial bias in law enforcement, citing the Westbridge Plaza incident as a stark example. Social media hashtags had become rallying points for broader discussions, drawing attention to systemic issues that had been ignored or downplayed for decades. Tara found herself at the center of a movement she hadn't intentionally initiated. Calls for reform, for transparency, for mandatory bias training began circulating across the city's administrative and public channels. People she had never met reached out with stories of harassment, injustice, and fear, stories that mirrored her own. She realized that her experience, while personal, had become emblematic of a far deeper societal issue. The weight of that realization pressed on her shoulders, but she carried it with a sense of purpose rather than despair. At home, life was a delicate balance between normalcy and preparation. Tara and Marcus tried to maintain routines, meals together, quiet evenings, occasional walks. But the quiet was always punctuated by reminders of the ordeal. Phones rang incessantly with requests from journalists and activists. Notifications from social media platforms constantly flashed with reactions and opinions. Even simple errands in public required cautious awareness. Whispers followed them, cameras sometimes appeared, and eyes measured her with curiosity or skepticism. Despite all this, Tara refused to retreat. She refused to allow fear to dictate her choices or limit her presence in the world. The incident had taken a piece of her innocence, but it could not claim her resolve. Within the department, the repercussions were equally significant. Officers Briggs and Rayner were formally suspended, pending a full internal review and the possibility of termination. The disciplinary actions were accompanied by mandatory retraining programs, evaluations for bias, and citywide discussions on police conduct. These consequences, though necessary, highlighted a tension within the department between those committed to reform and those resistant to change. The incident became a symbol, a cautionary tale that reverberated through every level of law enforcement in the city. Marcus had to navigate this delicate landscape carefully, balancing his role as a husband defending his wife, a chief upholding the law, and a leader managing morale and institutional trust. Every decision was scrutinized, every meeting layered with political and ethical complexity. Amid all this, Tara discovered an unexpected strength in herself. She began documenting the entire process meticulously, not just for legal purposes, but as a record of her resilience and the systemic changes she hoped to influence. Each written note, each reflection, became a tool for clarity and strategy. She realized that her calmness during the initial confrontation, her composure during questioning, and her measured responses to criticism were not just survival mechanisms. They were instruments of empowerment. Every decision she made was aimed at ensuring that no one else would have to endure what she had experienced without support or justice. Public reactions continued to evolve, some supportive, some critical, but most increasingly aware of the structural issues the incident exposed. Community organizations began partnering with the department to implement reforms. Media coverage highlighted racial profiling, police accountability, and civic engagement in ways that were previously overlooked. Tara's voice, once private and confined to her personal life, had become public and influential. She had inadvertently stepped into a position of leadership, demonstrating not through aggression, but through unwavering commitment to truth and justice, that change was both possible and necessary. By the end of this period, Tara understood something vital. The incident at Westbridge Plaza had been more than a personal attack. It had been a catalyst, a stark reminder of the fragility of safety, the persistence of prejudice, and the power of standing firm in the face of injustice. And she had stood firm, not because she had to, but because she had refused to allow fear or bias to dictate her worth. She had faced the world, the department, and systemic racism head-on, and emerged not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and more determined to ensure that her experience would serve as a turning point for others who had yet to find their voice. As the weeks unfolded, the story of the Westbridge Plaza confrontation became a citywide conversation, and Tara's life shifted in ways she had never anticipated. Invitations came from community panels, advocacy groups, and educational institutions, all seeking her perspective on racial profiling, bias in law enforcement, and personal resilience. Each appearance required careful preparation, each word measured, but she began to discover a rhythm, an inner confidence that had grown from surviving the initial encounter. Marcus, watching her navigate these new responsibilities, felt pride and worry intertwining in equal measure. He had always known Tara to be strong, but the intensity of public scrutiny was unprecedented. Yet she adapted, not just for herself, but for the countless people whose voices had been silenced before her. She carried not just her own experience, but the collective pain and hope of others who had suffered injustice. The city began to recognize her not as the police chief's wife, but as a figure of accountability, moral courage, and relentless advocacy. At the police department, reforms gained momentum. Mandatory bias training was implemented for all officers, and evaluation systems were revised to include community feedback. Internal Affairs introduced more stringent oversight mechanisms to prevent misconduct and ensure transparency. Briggs and Rayner faced disciplinary hearings that were highly publicized. Their careers effectively ended by their actions. The department's leadership worked tirelessly to repair trust with the community, and every step was influenced by the reality of what had occurred. Marcus played a central role, balancing administrative responsibility with his role as a husband who had witnessed firsthand the impact of officer misconduct. Together, they created a framework not just for accountability, but for systemic change. Despite the growing external validation, Tara's personal journey was ongoing. She experienced nights of restless sleep, moments of anxiety when she heard sirens or saw police cars, and lingering flashes of the plaza confrontation. Therapy sessions, meditation, and long conversations with Marcus became essential tools to process the trauma. Each session revealed layers of pain, frustration, and anger that had been buried over years of experiencing subtle and overt racial bias. Yet she also found moments of profound clarity and strength, realizing that surviving the incident had not only proven her resilience, but had also positioned her to influence meaningful change. Her sense of purpose deepened with every step she took in public advocacy, transforming private pain into collective empowerment. The media coverage evolved as well. News outlets produced detailed investigative reports, highlighting both the personal and systemic implications of the incident. Editorials and opinion pieces debated the state of racial bias in policing, while local news covered the community's reaction and the department's reforms. Social media amplified these discussions, with citizens sharing personal stories and experiences, creating a ripple effect that spread far beyond the initial incident. Tara's composed and candid responses to interviews strengthened her credibility, garnering respect from diverse audiences. Her voice became a bridge between the community and law enforcement, a reminder that transparency, accountability, and courage could coexist with empathy and justice. As the public dialogue intensified, Tara and Marcus also focused on internal family resilience. They spoke candidly about the emotional toll of the incident, the pervasive nature of systemic bias, and the importance of maintaining strength in the face of adversity. These conversations were raw and honest, allowing both of them to express fears, frustrations, and hopes without judgment. They also became a foundation for collaboration in reform efforts, Marcus with his leadership role in law enforcement, and Tara with her growing influence as an advocate for justice and equity. The partnership strengthened, grounded in shared purpose and mutual respect. Tara's advocacy extended to educational initiatives. She partnered with schools and youth programs to discuss bias, respect, and civic responsibility, creating workshops that encourage dialogue and critical thinking. Her sessions emphasized empathy, understanding, and accountability, giving young people tools to recognize and challenge unfair treatment in their communities. Students responded with curiosity, insight, and questions that fueled further discussion. Tara realized that education was a powerful vehicle for change, one that could reach future generations before prejudice and bias became ingrained patterns of thought. Meanwhile, within the police department, Marcus faced the ongoing challenge of ensuring reforms were implemented effectively. Some officers resisted, viewing new policies as burdensome or threatening. Others embraced them, motivated by a renewed sense of purpose and a desire to restore public trust. Marcus navigated this complex dynamic carefully, using both authority and diplomacy to maintain order and accountability. His relationship with Tara offered perspective and insight, reminding him that policy and leadership must always center on humanity, fairness, and the long-term health of the community. Their combined efforts fostered a culture where officers were encouraged to reflect on their biases, confront mistakes, and prioritize ethical conduct in every interaction. As the city moved forward, Tara noticed subtle but meaningful changes. Citizens were more willing to report misconduct. Community members engaged in dialogue with officers. Public forums became opportunities for education rather than conflict. Slowly, trust was being rebuilt, brick by brick, one interaction at a time. While the shadow of the plaza incident remained a reminder of systemic challenges, it also became a catalyst for awareness, learning, and reform. Tara's voice, amplified by experience and unwavering determination, continued to resonate, inspiring others to challenge injustice and demand accountability, creating a legacy that extended far beyond one confrontation or one city block. By the 9th week after the incident, Tara had transformed from a private figure thrust unwillingly into public scrutiny into a deliberate, authoritative advocate for change. Her experience, once a moment of trauma and violation, had evolved into a platform for systemic reform, education, and empowerment. She understood that her journey was ongoing and that the work of justice would never truly be finished. But in that moment, she felt an extraordinary sense of purpose, knowing that her response to injustice could reshape perceptions, influence policies, and empower countless others to stand strong in the face of bias and discrimination. Months passed, and the ripples of the Westbridge Plaza incident continued to shape both the city and Tara's life in profound ways. The initial shock had transformed into sustained action. Community programs, police training reforms, and citywide discussions on racial bias became normalized as ongoing conversations rather than one-off events. Tara had emerged not just as the wife of the police chief, but as a leader in her own right, a symbol of resilience, accountability, and unwavering courage. She had spent countless hours meeting with community leaders, attending forums, speaking with youth groups, and providing testimony before civic boards. Each interaction was an opportunity to foster awareness, compassion, and change. The weight of the initial encounter, once suffocating, had now become a driving force. Every time she relayed her experience, she reminded people not of her suffering alone, but of the systemic patterns that allowed such events to happen and the responsibility of citizens and officers alike to challenge them. Within the police department, the consequences of that one day had reverberated far beyond the initial disciplinary actions. Departmental culture. Leadership meetings often included discussions on accountability, revisiting past incidents, and encouraging officers to self-reflect on their behaviors and assumptions. Briggs and Rayner had both resigned under pressure, a warning to others that misconduct and bias had tangible, career-altering consequences. While some officers resisted these changes, the visible support from community leaders, city officials, and even the public reinforced that reform was non-negotiable. The department slowly evolved into a more transparent and accountable organization, and Tara's advocacy was recognized as a catalyst that had accelerated this transformation. On a personal level, Tara's journey of healing and empowerment continued alongside her public work. She maintained therapy sessions, reflective writing, and intentional self-care routines that allowed her to process both the trauma and the triumph. Some nights were still restless, as memories of that confrontation returned unexpectedly, but each session strengthened her resilience and reinforced her determination to prevent similar injustices for others. Marcus remained a steadfast partner, providing emotional support while also learning from her perspective. Together, they navigated the delicate balance between public advocacy and private healing, reminding each other that progress required patience, persistence, and mutual respect. The media, which had once amplified the incident with shock and urgency, began to focus on the lasting reforms and community engagement efforts. Interviews highlighted Tara's calm composure, her unwavering commitment to truth, and her insistence on accountability. News outlets praised the city's proactive response, while also acknowledging that the incident was symptomatic of broader societal challenges. Social media platforms remained active with discussions on racial bias and police accountability, and Tara's voice remained central to the narrative. She skillfully leveraged this visibility not for personal gain, but to create systemic impact, encouraging reporting mechanisms, promoting community dialogue, and supporting educational initiatives aimed at dismantling prejudice. The incident also changed the way Tara viewed herself and her place in the world. The woman who had once been startled, momentarily powerless, or resigned to societal bias had transformed into a figure of moral authority. She now understood the power inherent in maintaining composure under pressure, in speaking truth to authority, and in converting personal adversity into a tool for broader change. Each step she took was deliberate, aimed at inspiring others to recognize their own agency and stand firm against injustice. She embraced the realization that leadership could be exercised quietly, firmly, and with integrity, proving that strength was not measured by aggression, but by consistency, resilience, and moral clarity. Community engagement initiatives that Tara championed expanded beyond the city's limits. Neighboring municipalities sought her insight on implementing bias training, community police dialogue, and youth mentorship programs. She worked with educators to develop curricula addressing equity, empathy, and accountability, ensuring that younger generations could recognize and challenge systemic injustice before it became normalized. Her influence created a network of citizens and institutions actively engaged in reform, each inspired by her experience and her unwavering commitment to justice. As the one-year anniversary of the Westbridge Plaza incident approached, Tara and Marcus reflected on the journey they had endured. The confrontation, once a moment of fear and humiliation, had transformed into a catalyst for personal growth, systemic change, and public awareness. Marcus, observing his wife's extraordinary resilience, felt immense pride and gratitude. Tara, reflecting on the months of advocacy and reform, felt a deep sense of fulfillment and purpose. They knew that while the city had made strides, the work of justice was ongoing, and vigilance was necessary to sustain progress. Still, the fear, pain, and uncertainty that had marked that day were no longer dominant forces. Instead, they had been replaced by clarity, empowerment, and hope. On the morning of the anniversary, Tara returned to Westbridge Plaza, not as a victim, but as a visitor who had reclaimed the space. She walked past the boutique where the incident had occurred, noticing familiar faces in the crowd who greeted her with nods of respect and recognition. Marcus accompanied her silently, offering quiet support. She paused near the spot where Briggs had once gripped her wrist and took a deep breath, feeling a mix of remembrance and triumph. The plaza, once a symbol of humiliation and bias, had been transformed in her mind into a place of awareness, accountability, and empowerment. That day, Tara addressed a small gathering of community members and press. Her voice was calm, strong, and unwavering. She spoke about the incident, the reforms that followed, and the ongoing need for vigilance against bias and injustice. She emphasized the importance of courage, community engagement, and moral responsibility. Her words resonated widely, not just because of her personal story, but because they articulated universal truths about justice, dignity, and accountability. In that moment, Tara Carter, once a target of unjust profiling, had become a symbol of hope, resilience, and change. Her experience, though rooted in personal injustice, had created a legacy that would inspire reform, awareness, and courage for years to come. And as she stood there, sunlight glinting off the plaza's glass facades, she understood fully that one moment of injustice could ignite a lifetime of impact. The officers who had misjudged her, the public who had watched in awe, and the community that had rallied behind her, all were part of a larger story. A story of reckoning, reform, and resilience. Tara Carter had faced the worst assumptions of a biased system and had emerged not broken, not silenced, but empowered. She had turned an incident rooted in fear, prejudice, and abuse into a beacon of accountability, proving that even in the darkest moments, courage, truth, and perseverance could illuminate a path forward, not just for one person, but for an entire community.